This presentation really has nothing to do with trans families. Instead, the title of the presentation is Attitudes on Intimate Same-Sex Relationships, Evidence from Public Opinion Surveys. And I'm Siddharth Swaminathan. I teach at the School of Policy and Governance at Azim Premji University. So let me give you a brief outline and the way I want to structure this presentation. Azim Premji University has a collaboration with Lokniti Center at the Center for Study of Developing Societies. And the name of the project is called Politics and Society Between Elections. And this involves a large-scale public opinion survey across most states in India. We've covered about 12 states in 2017 and 2018, approximately 23,000 respondents. So as you can see, we've covered 12 states, a mix of states from the south and the north. Some states remain, and the final round of surveys, of course, will cover Kerala, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Delhi, and so on. In any case, this public opinion survey covers a number of issues or number of ideas that have emerged in public discourse in India today, ranging from access and availability of public services, welfare schemes, thoughts and emergent ideas in nationalism, on gender, on social networks, bridging and bonding capital, and so on. So it's an extensive survey. And in this survey, we have included a question, two questions on same-sex relations. And what I will present are some very preliminary empirical observations. Again, most of it is a data mining exercise. I really don't have a frame right now, and the expectation is that as I think through this data, through the results, both on my own and collectively, some sort of a frame might emerge. So currently, I'm not really looking at any particular hypotheses, though I do try to have some fun with the data, and hopefully it will show up here. So the structure is as follows. I'll talk about the questions first, the kinds of questions we posed in these surveys. Slice these questions by primarily socio-demographic descriptors. We know that politics and society in India, or the primary lenses through which politics and society in India are seen, are caste, religion, community, class, and so on. So those will be the socio-demographic characteristics that I look at. And I also want to look at how attitudes relating to intimate same-sex relationships correlate with other attitudes on nationalism, on freedom of expression, on patriarchy, and so on. So I think that might turn out to be somewhat interesting. So let me begin. The survey questions we posed were as follows. Sexual relationships between two men or two women should be accepted in society. The responses range from fully agree to fully disagree. This was in one set of states. In another set of states, we had a slightly different version. Here, the version is I'm going to read out 3 statements about same-sex relationships. Which one do you agree with the most? Same-sex relationships should be punished. It's a medical problem that needs to be treated. And the third option being it should be treated the same as other relationships. Now, again, here we had a slight dilemma. Do we want to look at it from a social perspective, a social taboo sort of perspective, or do we want to look at it from a legal perspective? Again, this is the first time, I think, such an extensive survey is being done on attitudes, primarily focusing on queer relationships, on same-sex relationships. So I think it would be good to kind of brainstorm a little bit and think about what could be other ways of posing these questions, and I'm always open to those sorts of suggestions. Okay, so look, starting there, I have a lot of slides. So Arvind, please cut me off if I'm going on and on about this. Anyway, so first let me look at the distribution of attitudes. I hope you can see. Yeah, fully agree to fully disagree is the range of responses, and then we have a no opinion option as well for people who don't have an opinion to kind of choose that. So of course, as we see, the largest proportion, close to 40% of the respondents, fully disagree that same-sex relationships should be treated the same as other relationships, right? Between men or women, same-sex sexual relations. So this has the element of intimacy in here. And if we combine the somewhat disagree and the somewhat and the fully disagree, it kind of goes to about close to 50%. So this is a majoritarian view, and none of us are surprised with that, right? Interestingly, we find about 25% of respondents don't have an opinion on this. So that's kind of an interesting emergent category that we are seeing across the states and across different demographic characteristics, right? And this is the simple question: same-sex sexual relationships between men and women should be accepted in society, and this is the distribution, and this is the second sort of question we asked, where we have three options. Should it be punished? Should it be considered a medical problem? And should it be treated the same? And of course, no surprise that equality appears has the least purchase, and punished close to 20%. And again, if you look at the non-responses, about 65% of our respondents say that they don't have an opinion on this matter. So that again is something which we find interesting and requires, I think, further exploration. And again, this is a very preliminary analysis of the data, so I just present it as it is. And here we have some cross-state variation. As you can see, again, look at the non-responses, very large numbers, especially in states like Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, somewhat Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh. Bihar and Jharkhand have the least number of non-responses. But again, as expected, the proportion of respondents who say fully agree is, the maximum goes up to about 15%. And large numbers of individuals, between 38 to 45% of respondents fully disagree that same-sex intimate relations should be treated as in the same way as other relationships. So, and again, if we look at 4 other states, Gujarat, Haryana, Karnataka, and Odisha, we find again non-responses in large numbers, and a permissive or an acceptance, whether it's a medical problem or whether it should be punished, seems to take up a relatively large chunk of respondents, while those who say it should be treated the same is just a sliver, as you can see in these stacked bar charts. Okay, so that kind of gives us a sense of cross-state variation. Let me quickly move on to some other demographics and look at caste, religion, education, age, and so on. Okay, caste identity. I'm going to kind of quickly run through this, and where I found something interesting, I'll kind of pause and talk a little bit more about it. Not surprisingly, we don't find much variation across different caste groups. The proportion of those respondents who fully disagree is more or less the same. You don't see dramatic variations across caste groups, caste identities, Dalit, Adivasi, OBC, and other. These are self-identified identities. And religion, of course, needless to say, we again don't find much difference, with the exception that Jains and Buddhists tend to be more permissive of intimate same-sex relations. Again, if you look at the blue stacked bars, you find that among Buddhists, Jains, it's the largest proportion, whereas Hindus, Muslims, and Christians largely tend to fully disagree with this question. Education, surprisingly, we find very small differences as levels of education increase. One would expect that college and above educated would have a larger share of the blue, but again, it's only marginally greater than those who have a high school education. So once again, we don't find dramatic differences, nor do we find differences across urban, rural respondents. It's kind of more or less the same. No differences across men and women. Men are apparently, it seems, that are slightly more likely to agree, But again, these differences are not statistically significant. Even though there might be a 2-3 percentage point difference across these two groups, it's identical. So age, again, we find that youth tend to be slightly more agreeable to intimate same-sex relations, and as people, there seems to be a generational change there. So the youth typically, the numbers are between 18 to 35, 35 to 60 is the middle, and 60 and above is the older age group. And again, among the older age groups, we find that non-response is highest. No opinion is highest. Then the next one is information source. What is the primary source of your information? Pernicious effects of television viewership are obvious here. We see that internet, those who are exposed to the internet tend to be most responsive or most amenable or most agreeable in this sense. So possibly that internet kind of exposing individuals to different perspectives or different ideas kind of produces a more democratic atmosphere or platform in which people consume information. And again, there are interesting correlations between information source of primary information and age. So the young tend to be more attuned with the internet, whereas older it becomes more television based. So again, I think there are more interesting ways in which we can slice this, and it's certainly something that we intend doing in the future. Okay. So this is the basic broad demographic patterns that we observe, basically non-patterns except for age. Other than that, caste, class, religion, education. Class and education seem to be highly correlated in this data, which is why I'm presenting only education. The class patterns mirror what we see in education, and very small differences across class groups, right? Income groups, basically, that's what I mean by class groups, not in a structural leftist Marxist way, but more as an income. So next what I do is I try to relate. So the question I have is do liberal attitudes we observe in politics about political institutions, do they correlate with similar kind of liberal attitudes on these kinds of social questions that we ask, right? So in that sense, I look at three broad groupings of concepts. One is nationalism, and we know nationalism is increasingly playing an important role in Indian politics and society today. The second is on questions of freedom of expression, and the third is on questions of patriarchy, or what I think captures patriarchy. It's, empirical measures never really match or map perfectly onto the beauty of concepts that we have, right? So maybe we can open it for discussion. Maybe you'll say, oh, this doesn't capture patriarchy at all. Well, let's talk about that. And this is the first time I'm presenting this, so I'm kind of a little excited to hear. Okay, so I look at two questions on nationalism. One of the questions we asked was, the government should punish those who do not say Bharat Mata Ki Jai at public functions, right? Now, this is a very real dimension of nationalism which is emerging in India today, right? And the idea is that individuals who strongly disagree, right, that the government should punish those who do not say Bharat Mata Ki Jai can be thought of as some sort of a liberal, right? And those who strongly agree can be thought of as the conservatives, right? The cultural, national conservatives, right? So interestingly, what we find is that there is a sort of liberalism on the Bharat Mata Ki Jai. So you look at this, those who strongly disagree on Bharat Mata Ki Jai, these liberals, cultural nationalist liberals, tend to be more conservative when it comes to same-sex intimate relations, right? So if you look at this I have to stand. If you look at this, this is so large. My expectation was, prior to running this, that this would be much larger than this, right? But I was really surprised to see this result. And the next question on nationalism that we have is, government should punish those who do not stand during the national anthem. Now, if you compare the one with the previous, the Bharat Mata Ki Jai clearly introduces a cultural inflection into the question of nationalism, right? Whereas the national anthem is a more, how do you say, can I say secular? I'm kind of very scared of using these terms. 2 minutes. Okay, so let's go with the more secular idea of the national anthem as compared to Bharat Mata Ki Jai, which is much more religious, cultural, and we don't observe much difference, right? So questions of nationalism and liberal nationalist thought does not seem to be related to a liberalism on these social issues, right? The next is freedom of expression. I might take a couple of minutes more, but I'll try to rush through. So, again, people should be allowed to express their opinion even if they make fun of religious communities other than their own, right? So this kind of captures the American constitutionalism where freedom of expression is paramount, as opposed to Indian constitutional amendments in which freedom of expression has reasonable restrictions. So those who strongly agree would be the Charlie Hebdo's, whereas strong disagreement would be, more consistent with Indian restrictions on what freedom of expression constitutes. Here, interestingly, we do see a change, right? Charlie Hebdo's, who are probably the more liberal types of individuals, are also less likely to fully disagree on the idea that same-sex relationships, intimate relationships should be accepted, right? Whereas those who strongly disagree are also more likely to strongly disagree on agreeing to make, on the acceptability of same-sex relations, okay? This next one is, again, more recently, individuals who've spoken about independence, who've publicly demanded independence, have immediately been charged under some laws of sedition, and the Kanhaiya Kumar style, Arundhati Roy, Kanhaiya Kumar style. So just picking up these questions, we find a similar pattern. So there seems to be something about liberal attitudes on freedom of expression and a liberal social attitude on same-sex, intimate same-sex relations. And finally, I look at two questions on what I think might capture some patriarchal tendencies, and this is women should have the right to decide to get married or not, right? Here it's much more dramatic, right? Patriarchal attitudes, so those who strongly disagree also strongly disagree on whether same-sex relations should be accepted or not, right? So this is one question that we have on the right, on gender attitudes is what I call it. And the next question is, it's up to women to decide whom to get married to, right? So it's not just whether they want to get married or not, but whom their choice of partner also, again, very similar to what we see earlier. So these are the patriarchs, right? And those who strongly disagree to this also fully disagree to seeing the permissibility or accepting same-sex relations. So quickly concluding, it's very unsurprising. These attitudes when it comes to distributions in terms of percentages are large, close to 50%. Majoritarian attitudes still pervade, negative majoritarian attitudes still pervade when it comes to intimate same-sex relations. Political liberalism has limited to no relationship to social liberalism. So to assume or to think that someone who's politically liberal would automatically be a social liberal, that transition or that the overflow does not seem to appear in this case. Patriarchal gender attitudes tend to map very closely with similar patriarchal attitudes on same-sex relations. I'm very happy to hear your comments. Look forward to that. Thank you.